All right, so I'm Matt Ryan with AvWeb, here with Christian Ramsey, who's the Chief Commercial Officer over at uAvionix, as well as Paul Rossi, who is a drone training specialist, as well as a Director of Safety over at Causey Aviation Unmanned. Here to talk a little about Part 108, as well as how that, what exactly that means, as well as how that's going to apply to some of the manned aviation world. So if you guys want to just kind of jump in a little bit to what is Part 108, how is that different from Part 107, and we kind of start going from there.
So, both Part 107 and Part 108 govern what the FAA calls commercial operations. So this isn't people flying for fun. This is folks that are trying to conduct business. Part 107 was instantiated a few years back, and that was really governed by some constraints in what you could do with the aircraft. In primarily, there are lots of them, but primarily there's a limitation on flying beyond visual line of sight. So with Part 107, the aircraft had to remain within your visual line of sight as the drone pilot or the drone operator at all times. So think about things like roof inspections or bridge inspections where you're standing on the shore, standing in front of a building, and you're looking up and you're actually controlling the drone from where you're standing. Part 108 goes much farther, and this is really sort of the construct that the whole industry is trying to been work working towards for about a decade now. And that is a lot more autonomous operations, things that where the drone will fly beyond the line of sight of the person operating it. And that might look like something called a dock system, where you've got an operator, maybe a police department officer in a control room somewhere, and they get a call, and there's a dock on the roof, and it opens up, and the drone flies and provides oversight to whatever the event is that they want to see. It could be a long linear inspection, like flying a pipeline or flying a power utility lines or something like that, looking with sensors on board. It could be package delivery, so that's something that a lot of vendors. So something a lot more complex than just a one-to-one person to drone, short distance kind of of an operation.
Sounds good. Anything you'd add to that, Paul, as far as maybe use cases or more expansion on who it's for? Christian, I think you did a good job on that, but
Yeah, thanks. I would say the scalability, um, putting more emphasis with Part 108 versus a 107 on the hardware, on the software, and the system to be able to function, bake that situational awareness into the product through onboard mechanisms, through ground-based mechanisms, through cloud-based systems that are, allowing systems potentially to communicate to one another in airspace that is going to be much higher risk, more congestion. Population densities are kind of part of Part 108, but I don't. That's an interesting one because under 107, with power lines and some of these right of ways that are being inspected, they have that limited population density, but just based on the way that the measurement works, they fall into these areas that are going to be more of a challenge in uncontrolled. The dock systems we saw recently, unveiled yesterday, a drone that you got an arm and it launches out of the back of a truck. So I think removing the pilot from on site is the primary uh, focused intent here. So you could have a system be in a dock, or you could have a system in a vehicle, and someone can still drive the vehicle to the site, but the person that is physically there more is maybe an engineer, someone that's associated with the ground operation and doesn't have to have that piloting qualification skill training.
Yeah, and if you can imagine, there's a lot more, as Paul mentioned, focus on the entire operation versus the particular flight. And one of the things that Part 108 does is it shifts the responsibility, um, liability from the individual pilot to the organization performing the operation, and leaves the organization as the liable, responsible party who may be operating a fleet, But that organization is responsible for training, for making sure that the entire system is operating the way it should, that they bought drones that are manufactured to certain levels of quality, that they're using data links that are appropriate for the area that they're using, and detect and avoid mechanisms. So it's the organizational responsibility and not just the individual, where a lot of Part 107 operators are little one-man shows, right? And out there conducting, and so it's a bit more shift to lack of a better word, a corporate focus.
Sure. And so before we get into kind of the implications for the manned side of aviation, I do just want to point out, this is not yet written in stone, right? So where can you guys speak to kind of where these new regulations are in the process of becoming official?
Yeah. So October 6th is the deadline for the deadline for submitting comments. That will then kick off a many month process where the FAA has to read and adjudicate everyone's comments. There's anticipated to be thousands and thousands of them, and figure out what to do next and enforce a final rule. Per one of the executive orders that were issued earlier this year, there should be a final rule in place around the February timeframe. So that for getting something in place, that puts a big burden on the FAA to go through that process and adjudicate all those comments. It's also worth mentioning that the rule is actually a joint FAA and Transportation Security Agency rule. So it's both TSA and FAA rule. So both organizations have to go through that process.
From that 107 standpoint, I think it's the waivers that are potentially going to go away. What's the timeline look like for that? The possibility of adopting a 107 policy that reflects the waivers that have been granted, because folks are doing very limited range, 1-to-1, quarter mile, half a mile, population 0, and they're not going to try to scale their organization with docs and pilots off site acting more as controllers. The 108 framework doesn't really mention the pilot qualification or certification. It's trained operators or flight controllers. So this idea of what BV loss is for 50-mile flights, 30-mile flights, BV loss where the pilot is operating a system over the cloud, not I just need to be shielded for a very short range real estate stuff. It's so navigating that is still a piece that has to be it's going to be commented on, and hopefully things somewhere in 107 or 108 can reflect that. But the goodness, yeah, lost my train of thought there on the scalability aspect and the Part 107 regulatory framework. So
Yeah. So I guess just like most of our viewers and readers and such are probably mostly interested on the man side of aviation as to where that where the implications and kind of intersections with that world come into play here. I know Christian and speaking with other people at uAvionix, you guys have mentioned some thoughts around right of way rules. Kind of how does this change? What are they like now? I think my understanding, it's been a minute since I've been in the drone world, but basically small unmanned aerial system is pretty much given the right of way to everything, right? How does that change? What's kind of at play here? What are maybe some concerns that you guys see around the new proposals?
Yeah, so the general scope of Part 108, it's important to state right up front that it governs everything under 400 feet above ground level. So everything we're going to talk about with regards to right of way is really specific to that. Under 400 feet, because yes, there are going to be drones flying higher and bigger and in different airspaces. Those are going to operate under a whole different set of rules, probably waivers to Part 91, things along those lines that are going to be operated a lot differently than Part 108. Part 108's trying to get to call it the 80% rule set, where a lot of people can go start flying and delivering packages and inspecting their infrastructure and do that. So what that means is under 400 feet, which the FAA has deemed the safest place to start. right? And with limited operations occurring below 400 feet, and I know several commenters will push back on that statement, right? There's certainly a lot of agriculture operations that occur below 400 feet, et cetera. And they've got a right certainly to make comments about. So under 400 feet, and not in a shielded area. Paul mentioned a shielded area earlier. So a shielded area in the rule is defined as within 50 feet of a structure, right? So you're flying really close to something, and probably because you're so close to something, there's not going to be a manned aircraft there. So if you're outside of a shielded area and you're under 400 feet, what the rule says is the drone will give right of way to a crewed aircraft in two conditions. One is the crewed aircraft is arriving or departing at an airport, so you're not going to have conflicts, on departure and arrival of your airport. And two, if you're equipped with one of two types of an ADS-B out signal. And when I say one of two types, one is traditional ADS-B, you've got it installed, but they're also offering a second type of lower cost beacon system that they call electronic conspicuity as an alternative, because they know that the GA community might need a lower cost way to establish their safety bubble in order to, but may not need to equip with a full ADS-B out system because they don't fly in controlled airspace where that's required. And so those are the sort of two options that are offered. There is a lot of confusion I've seen on the comments that are already filed regarding that 400 foot, because people are saying, hey, I'm flying, in controlled airspace, and how's, it's not really what the rules governing. The rules governing under 400 feet, and that right of way is associated with that under 400 feet. We have that electronic conspicuity product module or device was really inspired by something that we uAvionix do overseas in a lot of other countries. So if you don't mind, I'll talk a little bit about what it is. So this is, you guys are familiar with the ForeFlight Sentry device probably. So this is a portable ADS-B in receiver. It connects to your iPad through a Wi-Fi hotspot, and it'll show you the ADS-B traffic and weather. This one is called a Sky Echo, and this is an electronic conspicuity device. So you can see that it's literally almost exactly the same form factor. The difference is that this has a transmitter, and this presents an ADS-B beacon that is broadcast short range compared to an installed ADS-B system, right? Because it's a lower power. Antennas are inside. You don't have an antenna outside. It's a different use case. This isn't something that's meant to get you Class B airspace access. This is really just meant to say, hey, I'm here. It's like turning your headlights on is really what it's like, right? So others can see you and you can see them if they've got similar types of scenarios. So that's what the electronic conspicuity component is about. Yeah.
Sounds good. So as far as electronic EC, with that, it's as far as that's concerned, what is the availability of that sort of thing like now? Is that something people can use as things stand? Is there any, anything like that? I tell you, you mentioned right.
For your audience in the US, it's not an approved system, right? It is approved, and we sell a lot in the UK and Australia and Europe, and a lot of other countries have adopted this. And the reason they adopted this is because they don't have the same kind of ground-based infrastructure that we have, right? And sort of what happened was around the same time that the US was going through the implementation of the ADS-B mandate, so call it 2018 to 2020, where everybody had to equip with all of their ADS-B equipage, other countries said, hey, I really like the idea of ADS-B from a mid-air collision prevention tool, but I'm not going to invest, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in a ground infrastructure. So let's define something lightweight that people can start to get used to the idea for. We brought that back to the FAA and said, we'd like to do this here. And basically they were like, it's too soon. We're still in the middle of implementation. We got to get everybody installed with compliant systems. It's not a no, never. It's a no, not right now kind of a conversation that we had, call it back then in that same time frame. It is time, right? Time. We're a few years past the mandate period. The equipage levels adoption rate has pretty much leveled off. And, they're looking at this as a way to continue to improve safety without sort of confusing the issue of, do I need an installed system? Do I need a portable system? So more along with that result. Yeah.
Makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
and so how does this then work? I know you mentioned it's kind of like turning your headlights on, right? So it's not tied to a tail number or anything like that. My understanding of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple things that, a few reasons people don't like and won't equip with ADS-B today. One is cost, for sure, right? Costs several $1,000s to buy TSO'd equipment and get it installed in your aircraft. And so cost is a big differentiator. One of these costs about 650 pounds, or about $700, $800 equivalent, right, in the UK. So there's a huge difference in cost. Another thing that people don't like in the US here is uh, privacy and anonymity, right? They're being tracked, or they have the feeling that they want to be tracked. They don't want to be tracked, and therefore they don't want to have enforcement actions placed on them, or they don't want landing fee bills to show up like we've seen in the industry, right? So one way to do that is to make this signal anonymous, because if you're just trying to avoid hitting something, you don't care who it is, you just don't want to hit anyone, right? And so the signal can be broadcast in an anonymous way, meaning it doesn't have your tail number embedded into the message, right? So there's a component of a traditional ADS-B message called the ICAO address that maps to your tail number, so they can always figure out who you are unless you're using the anonymous mode. And so this would use the anonymous mode. And then the third thing they don't like is, hey, I've got it installed, but the rule says that I've always got to have it on. And so there may be situations where I'm flying in controlled airspace where I've got to have it on. But even if I'm flying in an airspace where they don't require it, they still require me to have it on. That's not true with one of these. You can turn it off. You can take it down, right? You don't have to use it in airspaces that you don't want to. So this is sort of voluntary in that respect.
And I'd say one thing that I was told recently, commercial UAV, uh, earlier this month, was that, remote ID just really isn't an effective, like, tool for drones because of the amount of power going to the system. There's no standard. Remote ID just has to broadcast this. But from a technical standpoint, if you're only, supplying, a small amount of power to that small transmitter, software updated board that's doing, just some local, versus having a more uh, range specific uh, remote ID function. But if you look at, the intent of that was kind of to appease some of the three-letter agencies that didn't like Part 107, just allowing millions of drones to go in the air with, oh, you could put a sticker on the side of it, but how could someone local, oh, well, you're going to pull your phone out and you're going to pick up this very, very local signal.
Yeah, really important in terms of, like, back to Matt's original question about the right of way. Why did they propose that? Why did they propose that the drone would ever have a right of way over a manned aircraft versus always the drone has to yield to the manned aircraft? And that comes down to the detection mechanisms, right? Because if the drone always yields to a manned aircraft, then um, the drone has to have that capability to detect that manned aircraft so it can stay away from it. And how can it do so effectively and affordably if the manned aircraft is not equipped with ADS-B? The manned aircraft is equipped with ADS-B. It's literally a chip inside the drone, right? It's very cheap. We make them, we sell them to drone manufacturers all the time. And so the ADS-B in portion of the drone is very easy to receive from a manned aircraft. But we also make something called a non-cooperative detection, meaning we have systems that detect an airplane that is not with ADS-B. And ours is a camera-based system, but there are radar-based systems too. And I'll just tell you, none of them perform nearly as well as an ADS-B signal, because they're range limited, they're weather limited, they're daytime or nighttime limited. There's just all sorts of limitations that make it hard technically to do that. So that's why the FAA settled on ADS-B as our solution. You talk about remote ID. Remote ID is a signal broadcast from the drone itself, right? And so in the case where the drone broadcasts a signal and the manned aircraft might want to receive it, really wasn't designed for that, right? As you said, right? It's a Bluetooth signal, and as a Bluetooth signal, it's power limited, it's range limited. I mean, everybody experiences problems with walking out to their mailbox and losing their earbud connection, and right, and it's not quite that short range, but there is a range limitation associated with it, and it's hard to do that reliably and do so in a way that is just predictably safe.
It's like you see just recently some police departments taking these very specific devices up in helicopters. Like if you can get the receiver high enough and that receiver can have enough uh I don't know what it's using to go out there and pull. It's maybe more of an aggressive receiver. I'm not that technical guy. So they've put them on helicopters. And if you hover the helicopter at 300, 400 feet, then yeah, you can kind of pick up some remote ID signals, but it's a very impractical solution. And I, what I have heard floated as an idea is, could a drone have that ADS-B on board, right? Because it's picking up a very strong signal. I've got some wing bits ADS-B receivers on my roof, very similar to whatever, all this ADS-B exchange for flight, I'm sending in ADS-B data and this thing's on my roof. Well, it's picking up aircraft from Washington, Dulles. I'm here in Raleigh, from Atlanta airport all the way to Washington, Dulles, and it's an antenna on my roof. So putting ADS-B on board an aircraft that's at 300 feet, it's gonna have good enough detection for, avoidance, detect and avoid. The issue is how could you put an ADS-B out with a different kind of signature, and only in the event of an emergency, like when that ADS-B equipped airplane gets close enough to one of these drones, the drone could then send a signal, but only in a, you know, avoidance type situation would it send out that signal.
Well,
But the
I feel
way
like you just teed me up there, Paul. I mean, that's something we've been preaching for years, right? We have a name for that. We call that inert and alert, right? And so the inert bit is that it's not transmitting. It's got an ADS-B receiver on it, but when something comes close enough, I want to turn my headlights on, right? I want to let someone know that I'm here. And so that is actually part of the uAvionix comments to this rule, right? Is to allow something like that, because there's still under the rules a prohibition on ADS-B out on drones, which your readers may or may not know. The FAA has been pretty strictly enforcing the use of ADS-B or restricting the use of ADS-B out signals from a drone because they don't want to create too much radio frequency clutter. Now, something like you just described there helps to solve that problem because 99% of the time, nobody's going to be transmitting, but that 1% of the time, you're going to want that signal.
it's like when you go onto these maps, the ADS-B maps, and then you filter the traffic. And as you filter the traffic down, the aircraft with the ADS-B out under 1,000 feet, most of them near airports, right? On the ground, landing. But there are the ones that are down low, flying pipeline patrols, transmission lines, doing some LiDAR, mapping work. All that stuff does happen. Helicopters. So it's as a UAS operator, it's just you want to stay out of the way. But how can you effectively do that in all airspaces?
Yeah, I want to be pretty clear as well on we obviously have a strong presence in the general aviation avionics world. Most of us in the company are pilots. we're also very strong in the UAS world, and so we really get this cross section of user bases. In uAvionix, we're exposed to everyone, and a lot of times the perception on the GA side is fear. It's fear based. It's I'm scared this thing's going to hit me. And now when something comes out in writing from the FAA and the writing says the drone's not going to always yield right of way to you, that is a scary gut reaction that community has. But understanding that the best case scenario that we could come up with is you make yourself known, right? We call ADSB drone repellent. Make yourself known so that the drones can avoid you, because believe me, they want to, right? And there's no one in the drone community stomping their feet and banging their fists saying, we need right of way over all crewed aircraft. That's not happening, right? I mean, they're just saying, I need a way to see you so I can avoid you. And that's kind of where this is coming from.
And with all the, like, the primary, main drone manufacturer, and even the ones that are following suit and saying, well, if it makes sense, they're doing it, we need to do it. They're building that ADSB in technology, and those drone pilots they're like, they want to show it off. They think it's the coolest thing. They're like, this is awesome. But then they also don't have that real understanding that not everyone's using it. And so I started flying in 2008, full glass G1000 airplane. iPads didn't exist. So to have full glass to start out flying, I always felt spoiled. Flew for 4 years, got away from it, and got back into it like 6 months ago and just started flying. It was all round dial, one small G5, Garmin, and instructor check pilots. Just got an iPad. Everything's on iPad. One plane has the Bluetooth wireless technology, so you can ingest the feed into your iPad, and then the other one has something stuck to the window. And it's, like that external mounted ADSB receiver, no ADSB out. Well, I'm signed off to rent that, and I'm flying that. Got my wife in the plane, and it's like we're 10 minutes into the flight, and just, all of a sudden, about 500-foot separation coming in the opposite direction, just aircraft right overhead. And just kind of, we looked at each other like, whoa. And that was like that one moment as I realized, like, I'm not doing anything wrong. But if you don't have the proper equipment, and not every airplane that's out there just is, uh, out in uncontrolled airspace, there's certainly people in that larger community that haven't adopted some of this advanced technology, ADSB out, ADSB in, and it doesn't mean you can't fly. So it increases the risk. It certainly increases the risk profile. And to go back to remote ID was kind of like license plates. This BV loss is the speed limit, where you can go beyond the speed limit, and unless you're detected and caught in that moment, the equipment, right? It's just what I've been saying a lot about Part 108. It requires this equipment to have that IMC type of qualification. You're going beyond visual line of sight. No, you're no longer VFR. It's not because it's bad weather, right? So the drone doesn't need that weather capability, cloud capability, but you're relying solely on instrumentation. And under Part 107, these aircraft, they don't have these advanced systems, and it doesn't mean they can't. But is it worth it when you're looking at the scalability and how much you're going to be able to do? Long range, controlled airspace, uncontrolled, all of it. You want to be able to check all the boxes.
And you're a little bit physics limited, right? I mean, a radar system that is, there are radars that are made for drones that might be a little bit bigger than your iPhone Plus, right? But it's got a limited field of view, so you got to put 3 of them or 5 of them on board in order to get your whole visibility range. Well, you just increase the weight that the drone has to carry, which means that you just increase the size of the drone, which means that if that drone now hits you, that's a lot more damage than something that didn't have 5 radars on board, right? So you're on one hand maybe increasing safety, but if there's a catastrophic event, that it's more catastrophic. So yeah, it's a tough balance. There are other airspace users that can benefit from EC. We've heard from a lot of balloon communities, Part 103, power parachutes and ultralights and things like that, that today can't really participate in an ADSB out ecosystem because they just don't have anywhere to put it. And I think we've probably all seen videos of scary encounters between a crewed aircraft and a guy on a powered parachute with a GoPro on him, right? And they, probably twice a month we get some outreach from folks saying, do you have anything we can use, because we're just scary, just had a scary encounter, right? So, EC can help with those folks as well.
Yeah. So on that note with EC, and, I know the Part 108 proposed wording, it does mention low cost portable electronics. I think it does specifically mention EC. So how do we get from where we currently cannot use that to we can? I mean, is that just by passing the wording as is? Does that get us there, or is there more that anything else you'd add to what people should be commenting?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as written, the FAA is proposing an EC device as a means of compliance, right? Which broadcasts to everyone that, hey, we're going to do this, and we can tell they're going to do this because they're testing our equipment, and we know this is working on. We're having discussions with them around what the correct specs might be and things along the lines. So I can see it happening in a timely period of time, and call it in the time frame of this rule, because they want to have something available once this rule becomes effective, right? And so I can see something happening there. So it's more of a what I'd like to sort of communicate to your audience is, think about that. I know and feel and hear all the time that fear-based reaction of, what do you mean right away is changing, right? Think about instead, or in addition to, maybe I don't like that, but I do like the idea of a portable EC device. And so, when you're structuring your comments and coming back to the FAA saying, hey, I'm not crazy about right of way changes, but hey, this whole idea of a portable EC device for air to air, collision avoidance is a good idea. You could structure it that way, depending on how you particularly feel.
And I guess I would just say ask, because portable thinking, like most aircraft manufactured now professionally have, again, the higher quality systems built into it. So it's something that is for legacy aircraft. Folks like you said that are flying in those the motors with the fans on them. I saw them go over the house, and I guess the speed too, when you consider balloons, like the speed that they're traveling, and the drone, it's just more thinking of that drone operator's detection ability. It's not like you're going 120 knots, right? And so the further out, like what's that closing time? You
Yeah,
know, this
well, I think probably the highest speed users that might use something like this, I'd throw in the agriculture aircraft category. Those guys fly, pretty fast, pretty low, come in over the trees and dive down on their fields. So I participate in some of that community's advocacy efforts, and I could tell you that they're worried about this. Um, a portable device that isn't a call it TSO installed device, like you said, might reach hundreds of miles from Raleigh to right to Dulles. But something like this is going to reach tens of miles, right? And so that's still a lot of bubble, right? That's still a lot of bubble and protection.
enough time for a US operator to make a decision, have that awareness. Because it always came down to like 3 miles visibility for drone operators, and it's the same for airplanes. Because like if you're flying VFR and if you don't see something till it's a mile away, what's the time, your reaction time? So slower speed, you don't have the power source on board of a balloon, right? To put in traditional equipment. And then just taking panels off, like, everybody wants to upgrade their aircraft, but then it's like the paperwork, the documentation, um, to to do all of that. Sometimes it's These are, I don't think, unless you're flying, I think it's hard for most folks to just remember too. It's like planes are the drone community, other non-operators. These are 1972, 1965 aircraft.
Yeah, it's like flying a Volkswagen Beetle. Yeah.
And so you don't want to have to take it apart unless you absolutely have to. So.
Well, yeah, guys, thank you so much. If you guys have any further comments or, maybe guidance on what people should be commenting on or anything like that, I know you've already mentioned a lot of that, but if you have any last thoughts on that front, love to hear what you have to say on that. As well as
October
where
6th.
do you go to comment on this?
That's a good. I wish I had that handy right here.
Well,
but
we'll probably put
October
a link in or
6th.
something with
Yeah, we'll
once
find a link and provide that. But you can literally Google FAA BV loss rule, and it will be like the first link, and to comment on that.
FA NPRM. Yeah. Like just Googling that Part 108 NPRM. There's been a handful of comments. It's interesting because I think remote ID, people have said, had over 40,000 comments, but there might only be 1,000 comments. If that. Last I knew, there was a couple hundred comments. So again, I think my analogy as I'm thinking about it is like license plates versus speeding. How many folks that commented on remote ID are just kind of out there flying these extremely low risk, and it's hard to just take one net and cast it and catch all the BV loss fish, like in the sense of what people are quantifying as BV loss. When I got into remote piloting, I was like, yeah, get a remote, and you have a remote and you're flying the drone. And then as you kind of start to think about what the industry considers remote is like, drone is here, pilot's here. So it's completely remote, offsite, non on connection. And so BV loss is Part 108 is trying to look at it is just not your under the bridge. I'm going to fly the drone under the bridge and lose line of sight to inspect it. But I'm not discounting those types of operations. They certainly need to be addressed. And I think the shielded comments, but then Part 108 goes back to full automation. And so most of these folks aren't flying full autonomous. So it'll be interesting when it comes to commenting, look at what the industry groups that you're involved with are kind of saying, because a lot of them are putting out comments, and don't just kind of think you got to make something up just to comment. And thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation, and for everybody's time and attention.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. So again, we've got Christian and Paul. So thank you guys for joining. And again, I think it's through October 6th. Is that right for comments?
Correct. Yep.
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you guys again, and appreciate all who join and watch us when this is up. So again, it's been AvWeb and Matt Ryan, Paul and Christian, and we'll see you next time.